Hello, I'm Joseph Rescigno, talking about my book, Conducting Opera Where Theater Meets Music. In this video, I'd like to talk about the right tempo. Now, some of you may say, is there a right tempo? Well, not down to the millimeter, no, because we're not machines, we're human. But there certainly is a right range of tempo, and that range is not as wide as some people think. Richard Wagner actually said that the primary duty of a conductor is to find the right tempo. And when he finds the right tempo, the correct phrasing and expression will happen. First, I'd like to talk about the music of Puccini, which has become slower and slower over the years. I'd like to point out two arias. One is the last aria of Liu in the opera Turandot. The metronome is given by Puccini, 69 to the quarter. He writes andante mosso, but he also writes con un po' di agitazione, with some agitation. If we take too slow a tempo, we lose the sense of urgency in Liu, and we lose an important part of the character of the music. This is what I'm talking about. This is how sometimes the aria is taken. It seems almost relaxed, but a little bit faster, you have that urgency. You also have the space to make the retards and some of the even held notes that he writes later in the aria. Here is a few measures later. Okay, now we have a slightly different problem with the aria from Tosca, Visi d'arte. In this case, sopranos often want to take the first part of the aria much slower than the indicated metronome. But then in the second part, they move the tempo, so that you hear it sometimes at this speed. And then when this section happens, they take it close to the tempo metronome indicated. However, if both sections, in fact the entire aria until just before the end, is taken at the same tempo, because there is no indication that this part, the second part I played, should go faster than the first part, we have a unity, and then when the molto allargando followed by ritardando con la voce happens, we can make a much slower tempo for maximum drama. And then we slip into the same tempo. Let's talk about music that is often taken faster than it should be. I'm thinking of two numbers. I'm thinking of, in the opera Don Giovanni's aria Finca del Vino. He writes these notes. But some singers, instead of singing presto, want to sing prestissimo. And it comes out Finca del Vino. But that's not. Another case in point is in the Barber of Seville by Rossini, the aria for Figaro, Largo al factotum. The first phrase is singable at a very fast tempo. Largo al factotum nella città. That can be sung quickly. But the second phrase, presto a bottega che l'albeggia, can't be sung so fast. It's almost impossible to cleanly spit the words out. So instead of, that's virtually unsingable for the second phrase. But if we go, largo factotum della città, largo, presto bottega che l'albeggia, presto, we can get all the words cleanly. Now, for a more extensive discussion, not only of the right tempo, but of joining different sections to find the right tempo that works for joining the sections, especially a different place in this Barber of Seville, I have this in my book. Now, let's talk about a tempo that is singable, that is not necessarily wrong in a technical sense, but misses the spirit of the piece. I'm thinking of Gounod's Faust, the second scene. It's called the Kermesse. It's a rustic village celebration. Admittedly, this was a problem maybe from the very beginning. No less a musician than the composer Camille Saint-Saëns writes an essay about the opera and complains that the Kermesse is usually taken at so fast a speed that the charm is removed and it becomes, in his words, a hullabaloo. Now, Gounod writes the metronome, and he writes allegretto, not allegro, and he writes 84 to the quarter, which is about like this. And you feel that kind of peasant, rustic quality. But if it goes, you lose that. At the first tempo, you can practically see large steins of beer, big goblets. So it's important for the character of the piece to find the right tempo. Another case in point, in this instance, where many sopranos want to go a little too slow, is Sente's Ballade from the opera The Flying Dutchman. This was the last time that Wagner put metronome markings. Granted, it was an early work, but after this, he never put metronome markings again. He gives a metronome of 63 to the quarter, which is about this. Many sopranos want to take it like this. Why doesn't that quite work? Well, she's telling a ghost story. And there's a certain mystery, a certain almost frightening quality to it. And if it goes at this ruhiga, this calm tempo, you lose that. Also, it's 3 verses. The third verse is marked to go slower. So if you go too slow in the beginning, you can't go slower in the third verse. But to kind of buttress my argument about the metronome, Chopin had already written 3 of his 4 ballades before this opera was composed. And they were wildly popular at the time. Certainly, the young Wagner was aware of this music. The first ballade, which was written almost 13 years prior to the opera, in the main melody, we get this tempo. Which is very close to third ballade, which was written just a few years before, basically the same tempo. So this also strengthens the idea that this was the tempo that Wagner absolutely wanted for this number. Thank you very much. I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, share it with friends who would find it enjoyable also. Until later.